very unexpected trend. A number of establishment liberals, including Hillary Clinton and John Kerry, suddenly starting to wonder if open borders are really a good idea after all. Kind of amazing. What does it mean? Dana Perino will join us in a minute to explain their second thoughts. Later in the hour, our ambassador to Germany will tell us what happened to the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, when she opened her country's doors to 1 million refugees in a single year. It's possible there are lessons there for this country. Then tomorrow marks the anniversary of Matt Lauer's firing from NBC News for sexual harassment. A year later, has anything changed? We'll talk to a former NBC employee who says the cover-up at NBC is still very much in progress, and she's got details. Also tonight, a postscript in the long and exceptionally seedy saga of the creepy porn lawyer. His most famous client appears to have turned against him. Did he defraud her? Details on that just ahead. But first tonight, after 2 long years of the most expensive and wide-ranging independent counsel investigation in a generation, we should be close to nabbing those dastardly secret agents from Russia who hacked our presidential election. Are we? No, we're not. Robert Mueller's prosecutors are instead threatening elderly men with life in prison for petty crimes, crimes that have nothing to do with spying or Russia or anything else that threatens America. The whole thing is a grotesque joke, but you never know that from watching cable television. Here was CNN just yesterday in all its breathless stupidity.
Potentially big new questions in the Russia investigation and the corresponding lack of answers from the White House.
And any kind of collusion with the Russians.
And then there's the Russia investigation.
We know the Russians were involved in interfering with the election.
From Russians offering, as we know in the Trump Tower meeting, some kind of dirt on Hillary Clinton.
That Russian hackers began to target Clinton's accounts.
Fact. It's Russia.
Russia, says Don Lemon. The word itself is a kind of magical incantation that eliminates all skepticism and rational thought in journalists. Whatever the claim is, they believe it wholeheartedly. Not just because they're dumb, though obviously they are dumb, but because Russia! It's a spell, like Eye of Newt. Just yesterday, the Guardian newspaper reported that Paul Manafort, the former chairman of the Trump campaign, held a series of secret meetings with Julian Assange at the Ecuadorian embassy in London over a period of years. It all sounded very sinister. The problem is there is precisely no evidence that any of that actually happened. There's a lot of evidence to suggest the story is false. Assange is one of the most closely monitored people on the planet, living in Europe's most heavily surveilled city. And yet somehow nobody saw or recorded any of these meetings, which, by the way, everybody supposedly present denied ever took place. The whole thing was absurd. Under pressure from reality, The Guardian quickly walked back its story. And yet here's the key part. The geniuses in the American press corps continued to act like it was all completely real. The Washington Post senior political reporter Aaron Blake repeated The Guardian's claim as gospel. So did John Campbell of CNN and CNBC's John Harwood, not surprisingly. Because whatever, it sounded right. Manafort would probably meet with Assange in Russia or London, whatever. Who cares if he actually did? Keep in mind, these are reporters. They're supposed to be fact-based. They're supposed to be our watchdogs. They're not. These people are just mindless enforcers of whatever the establishment line of the day happens to be. They're intellectual thugs, dispatched to make the rest of us shut up and obey our ruling class. Who'd believe anything they say? Molly Hemingway does not believe what they say. She's a senior editor at The Federalist, and she joins us tonight. Now, the Guardian story I pulled out because it's in a great piece that you wrote today, but also because it's a metaphor for a lot of our coverage. This story was transparently thin at best, and yet it was repeated as if it was real.
It's just like all of the other Russia stories that we've seen. There's a claim. It's a very hard to disprove claim. It doesn't really say exactly what's going on, but the Russia thing comes into play.
Russia!
And so everyone just falls for it. As journalists, though, we should have a higher standard. We should demand evidence. We should make sure that a story makes sense. And like you pointed out, The notion that Julian Assange could have a meeting with literally anyone and not be detected is hard to believe.
3 separate times over a period of years.
Not twice, but 3 times. It's not just a heavily surveilled city. He's holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy. They keep logs of who comes in. There's no record of Paul Manafort in those logs. The story explained this away by saying, oh, well, he failed to sign in. That's ludicrous. So you need to have a higher standard as a reporter, demand some evidence before falling for a story. And it's all of these stories are used to present a cloud of suspicion. It's not that Russia meddled in the election. They did. They have done that for decades. They do it. That's what they're known for. But the notion is that Donald Trump is a traitor who treasonously colluded with Russia to steal Hillary Clinton's election. That's the claim that has been put out in the media. That's the one that they have to prove. To say that they haven't come close to making that, to proving that claim is an understatement.
The problem is that sometime very soon this is going to culminate in a report from the special counsel's office, and we're going to have to chew over a lot of different allegations. And the people presenting those allegations to us have no credibility left. So where does that leave the country?
Well, I mean, this is the problem. I think you would assume that at this point, if people were still trying to push this theory, that they would understand that there's a problem. There's no evidence for it. There's no way you can actually, with a straight face, make this claim. You would assume that some reporters would start to try and backpedal. I don't know if they're just so embarrassed about how much they pushed it 2 years ago to undermine the incoming administration, if they're embarrassed about how they just received leaks from intel folks without doing due diligence on them, or if they just fell for the information operation because they weren't smart enough to see through it. I don't know if it's just that.
Can I ask you a quick question? We're almost out of time, but I'm just interested since you follow this as closely as you do. Have you heard anybody in the press corps say, hey, wait a minute, here you have Robert Mueller threatening 72-year-old Jerome Corsi with prison because he couldn't remember forwarding an email? Maybe that's excessive. Has anybody said that?
There's been no skepticism on any aspect of this story. And there's been the other part of this is there have been a lot of things that we've learned about bad behavior and bad actions by senior officials in the government. And the media have not shown concern or care about that.
Because they're handmaidens to power, because their job is to defend the establishment.
It's shameful.
It is disgusting. Molly, thank you.
Thank you.
Kim Strassel is on the Wall Street Journal editorial board. She's followed this story very closely and joins us pretty regularly for updates. Kim, it's great to see you tonight. What's the latest?
Hi, Tucker. So I think latest we've got out there is a new text that was released by Carter Page today, in which it shows that he was first contacted by reporters all the way back in July of 2016 asking him about specific claims that were made about him in that infamous dossier.
Yes.
And the reason this is important, Tucker, is you go and you look at the testimony from Fusion GPS founder Glenn Simpson or depositions that were made by Christopher Steele's team, and they have always made it sound as though when they got this information, these explosive revelations supposedly about Carter Page, they went straight to the FBI. Their only interest was in national security and alerting law enforcement, and that they didn't actually go to the press until months later. Well, it turns out almost within days of him putting together these allegations, they were out shopping it to the press, seeing if they could get it out there in the middle of July.
So what you're saying is that this creepy foreigner with actual Russia ties, Christopher Steele, accuses a former naval officer, an Annapolis grad, falsely of being a Russian agent, and everybody in the press takes this at face value?
Well, look, I want to give credit where it's due, and I think this is important. According to Mr. Page, he was contacted by numerous reputable press outfits during the summer, all asking him this question. He denied it, and they never ran with the story.
Right.
It took Simpson and Fusion all the way up until September to finally get somebody to bite. But the point here, the bigger point, is it completely undermines this claim that this was just something they took to law enforcement. It's clear that already in the middle of July, before the FBI had ever started its counterintelligence investigation, that this was the chatter among the press corps, undoubtedly among most people in the Obama administration, probably within the intelligence agencies, and undoubtedly there was pressure being brought to bear on the FBI, therefore, to act.
Amazing. It's an amazing story. At some point, the whole story will be written, and I think it'll look very different. I hope you will write it. Kim Strassel, thanks very much for that.
Thank you.
Well, the special counsel investigation is accelerating. At some point, possibly soon, we're going to see Robert Mueller's report, or parts of it. If it's not released to the public, parts of it will certainly be leaked. will have that information. The question is, how should we assess it? Alan Dershowitz has thought a lot about this question. He's a retired Harvard Law School professor, author of The Case Against Impeaching Trump, and he joins us tonight. Professor, thanks for coming on. So are we likely to see this report in whole or part, and what should we think when we do?
Well, first, we will eventually see much of the report, probably the whole report eventually, but we should never see it until we also see the president's legal team rebuttal, because otherwise it's a completely one-sided presentation. Remember, it's like an indictment. Even though it won't be an indictment, it's one-sided. It's based on the testimony only of witnesses that the prosecution sought to call. And as everybody knows, an indictment can't be used as evidence of guilt. It doesn't undercut the presumption of innocence. It's just a charging document. And that's the way we ought to read the report issued by Mueller. It's simply an accusation, and we must see the other side of the story before we can come to any conclusion. Somehow people think it deserves more credibility because it's a special counsel report, but that's not true. Special counsel is just another prosecutor looking at one side of the case, and he will present a one-sided account, which will be very critical of his subjects.
So the report, there's no requirement that the report has balance in it or shows both sides of any question.
Quite the opposite. It's a prosecutorial report. It will not show balance. Anybody who expects balance, fairness, nuance is looking at the wrong kind of document. You can't have balance when you haven't heard the other side of the story, when you haven't called witnesses who might be exculpatory, when you've only tried to put together a prosecutorial case. And that's why it's essential that the president's team be permitted to issue their own report at the same time the Mueller report is issued.
Interesting. So the people who said we need a special counsel investigation to find out what happened as an informational exercise were lying to us. So let me ask you a more fundamental question about the special counsel.
Yeah.
So every person who wields power in our society by design has some sort of oversight. We can defeat our elected representatives in elections. We can recall or impeach our president, our judges. The special counsel, we're told, can't be fired because that itself would be an impeachable offense. So is there oversight of any kind of the special counsel?
Well, first of all, firing the special counsel would not be an impeachable offense because it wouldn't be a crime. The president would have the authority to do it. It would be politically very damaging to do it. Look, technically, there is oversight over the special counsel in the personage of the Attorney General. Of course, our Attorney General was recused. Now we have an acting Attorney General. But the regulations provide that the Attorney General is not supposed to micromanage the work of the special counsel. He's not like any other U.S. attorney who's under the direct supervision. The ultimate control the Attorney General has is whether to release the report, under what circumstances to release the report, whether to redact parts of the report, whether to reject parts of the report and send it back to the special counsel and say, look, you didn't do a good enough job, go back to the drawing board and do it again. It's unlikely any of those things will occur, except I think that the Attorney General would be wise to demand that before the special counsel report is released to the public or even to Congress, that the president's legal team be given an opportunity to review and rebut it and provide their own report. Then the American public and Congress can see both sides in tandem and make an intelligent decision as to where the right is and how to bring nuance and find the truth. The truth is best achieved through an adversarial process, through presenting all sides of an issue, not presenting one side of an issue.
That's the whole premise of this show, by the way. Professor, thank you. Great to see you tonight.
Thank you.
Amazingly, Hillary Clinton and others on the establishment left appear to be realizing that open borders may threaten their own agenda. Unexpected. Dana Perino joins us next to explain that. Plus, Stormy Daniels seems to be turning on the creepiest porn lawyer in the world. She suggests maybe that he's embezzled money from her. Who knows? We've got breaking developments just ahead.
Tucker Carlson.
Well, in this country, the press and leaders of the Democratic Party tout immigration as an unmitigated good, always and everywhere, and you're immoral if you disagree. But once they leave our shores and go abroad and are not simply seeking power for themselves, occasionally they say things that stray from the script. Take last week. Hillary Clinton told the Guardian newspaper in Great Britain that Europe needs to curb migration to check the rise of extremist politics. John Kerry, of all people, appeared to agree and went farther than that. In a separate interview with The Guardian 2 weeks ago, Kerry said that Europe has been, quote, crushed by migration pressure, causing instability in Germany and Italy. All true, by the way. Dana Perino hosts the Daily Briefing and The Five, the most beloved person on this channel. She joins us tonight to explain what's going on.
Greg's going to be very upset. Greg Gutfeld will be upset that you said
that. It's neck and neck.
Everyone's
but what? I should also note that both of them were attacked by lifestyle liberals in the United States, defenders of the status quo, for saying that. But why did they say that, do you think?
I think you have to go back a little bit. Remember, both John Kerry and Hillary Clinton and Panetta, if you're going back, right, or Panetta, yes, all said that they disagreed with Obama when it came to how to deal with the rise of ISIS in Syria. Okay, so
right.
they all, when they left their Gates as well, they all leave, they all write books, and they all say, we disagreed with President Obama, but he was the president. We had to basically follow in lockstep. They wanted to do something much more aggressive. But because the rise of ISIS is allowed to happen, and then you have the huge migration crisis, and you have Angela Merkel making a decision that will go down in history as probably the worst ever in Europe in the modern era.
Yeah.
All of these migrants come, and remember, Putin opens up the floodgates and says, yeah, absolutely, you should go to Europe, right? And he knew the destabilization would happen.
Yeah.
We didn't do anything to stop it. So I think that actually Kerry and Clinton were more centrist and responsible when they were secretaries of state but they weren't able to influence the president, and they fully admit that in their books.
How interesting. Hillary Clinton, and I can't believe I'm saying this because I've often noted she's totally banal in almost everything she says. Nothing is interesting, but she did make a legitimately interesting point when she said this pace of change, demographic change, gives rise to extremist politics. And of course, she's absolutely right. When you ignore the population in a democracy, they seek other ways to express themselves. Do you think that idea, so clearly true, will catch on here?
I do, and I actually think that we have to look at this new Congress and the new governors, the Democrats that won the governorships, just look across the spectrum. If you look at the woman who won the New Mexico 2 district, her name is Torres Small. She actually ran on a pretty tough border security piece, but she also said she wanted to deal with DACA the way that President Trump had suggested that he was willing to do. The Republicans are going to take their cues from President Trump. If he says, I'm willing to do something here, let's bring back that deal. Nancy Pelosi, now you're the Speaker of the House. Let's try to work this out. And then I have this little fantasy, Tucker, that Gavin Newsom, the new governor-elect of California, could be a Democratic ambassador who comes to the White House and says, look, I'm not from Washington. I want to help try to solve this problem. Mr. President, you and I should try to work this together. I'll bring the Democrats, you bring the Republicans, and we can try and finally actually get things done. And I think you might actually end up with something President Trump would be happy with, but that would be really good for the country.
That's so interesting. And I don't mean this is an insult against Newsom, just an observation. He doesn't believe in anything. And sometimes the people who don't believe in anything or totally Machiavellian are the ones who get things done in the end.
Right, if you're not ideological. Right?
That's right.
I mean, wasn't that the appeal of President Trump as well, right? He's willing to get a deal done. And I just think that he has political capital to spend. He is in a border state. This is affecting him. Look, his businesses want to figure out a way to get migrant workers to come temporarily to work and to go back. He's got a problem, too, but he also has a political future. And I don't think anyone in Washington is up to the task. I think it's going to have to be someone from the outside coming to President Trump saying, I'm willing to hold your hand and jump together, sir. We can do this. I might be optimistic, though.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm more cynical, but that's super interesting either way. Dana, thank you very much for that.
Thanks.
Well, an amazing new poll, which can't be real because it contradicts everything they're telling you in the other channels, shows pretty conclusively that Mexican citizens dislike the caravan currently occupying their country, which of course means they're anti-Hispanic racists. Can that be real? That question next. Plus, we'll ask the ambassador to Germany how well mass immigration worked in that country. That's just ahead. at least for now, they're not on U.S. soil. They're in Mexico, right on the border in Tijuana. While the convoy agitates to be let into this country, no questions asked, the city of Tijuana is stuck with feeding and housing the migrants, and many Tijuana residents are fed up with that.
I'm not really in favor of them coming the way they did. You know, to me, it feels like they invaded.
In my more than 20 years working here, I've never seen a situation of this kind. It's as if we're in a war zone.
Are you worried more are coming?
Very much. We are not prepared for this.
But there are ways in which I can enter your home asking for support and help. This was not the correct way.
We are here because our government has not taken control of these, what we call invasions.
Should this caravan have been stopped at the Guatemala border?
Of course. I agree with that 100%. It should have.
Of course. Well, a new poll by a Mexican newspaper finds that 7 in 10 Mexican citizens hold a negative view of migrant families entering their country. 52% of Mexicans say their country should block any migrants from entering the country without documentation. So the question is, we're getting this right from CNN, are the citizens of Mexico anti-Hispanic racist? They've got to be with those attitudes. Ethan Behrman is a California radio host, and he joins us tonight. Ethan, what I find amazing about this is that the international racist conspiracy is so vast that it includes the majority of Mexican citizens. Like, I never even imagined that in my wildest dreams. Are you surprised to hear it?
I'm actually not surprised, Tucker, because we as human beings have a history of not liking the other. This dates way back. This is a deep part of our brains. So anytime that we see other people coming into our country, we have a negative response to it. That is something that we have to consciously overcome to connect as fellow human beings, because don't forget, these migrants are human beings.
Yes, but they're also, and by the way, there's some truth in what you just said, and I think it's a fair kind of non-judgmental observation of human nature, and I agree with it, I think. What I don't agree with is the reduction by the morons in control of our culture and our public conversation of everything to a simple black versus white versus Hispanic racial divide. And what I guess these pictures and interviews show us is that it's much more complicated. They're not racists for not wanting their country changed by migration overnight, are they?
No, that doesn't make them racist. But again, I mean, so Tucker, we don't live on the savannah. We're not cavemen anymore. So we shouldn't give in to those deep base feelings that are in what some people call the lizard brain part of our brains that are there that say anybody different. We had to live that way tens of thousands of years ago to protect ourselves. We're more advanced in that now. We actually have the technology to identify people, to process and to help people. Because remember, these are asylum seekers who are fleeing violence and food insecurity.
No, they're not. Okay, first of all, they're not fleeing a war. If they qualify for asylum, that means that every person in the nation of Honduras, by definition, qualifies for asylum, which is, of course, insane. But that's a separate debate. I'm interested, though, that you're giving the residents of Tijuana every benefit of every doubt. And you're saying their atavistic instincts are welling up like all peoples would, and I get it. That's basically what you're saying. And I appreciate that you're saying that. I've never heard any liberals say that about American citizens who say, wait a second, my country's totally different. Racist, shut up, bad person, Klansman. Why don't we give our own people the benefit of the doubt in the way that you're giving the residents of Tijuana?
Well, interestingly enough, Tucker, you and I have had similar conversations about people here in the United States before. And again, what I appeal, though, is for us to not just give in to those base instincts. Even here in the United States, we need to remember that these are human beings who deserve our care and our treatment as fellow human beings, so we don't just demonize them and say, oh my gosh, they're invading, because they're not necessarily invading, they're fleeing. And yes, by the way, they are fleeing what is essentially a war when MS-13 has taken over countries like El Salvador and dominated huge swaths of that country. That is like a war zone.
Okay. But they also have a point of view, and you're acknowledging for the first time in the immigration debate that the other side needs representation as well. Their lives are being changed, are being affected. It's costly. it's chaotic. Like, they have a perspective that we can't ignore by dismissing them as bigots. You're acknowledging that. And I'm saying, why can't we afford that same presumption of decency to American citizens? It's not just that they're irrational. When 1 million new people come in every year, when you've got 22 million undocumented in your country, that has an effect on you. It's okay to be upset about it, isn't it?
Well, look, we can acknowledge that assimilation can be difficult for the first generation, but remember, it's the second and third generations that assimilate, and we no longer have those feelings once we get over that initial shock of, hey, maybe they're speaking a different language, maybe they're eating different food, which we end up loving in this country. These are things that we can't give into that base instinct, and yes, we are a much bigger country that's much more economically rich. We have more resources available to help people, and we have to remember to help.
True. I think actually we're basically a broke country that thinks it's still rich, sort of like an aristocratic family in decline. We don't know how rotten the foundations are, but whatever, separate conversation. But will you at least concede that decent, this is all I want from this conversation, that decent people can look at mass migration and say, you know what, I'm not into it, I don't like it, and that doesn't make them bad people?
It doesn't make them bad. And again, I just want to say that we can't live our lives, we still live in caves and we're tribes on the savannah. And so I say we have to rise above that. It doesn't make you bad that you have that base instinct. But if you just give into it and stop there, you've stunted your own growth. And I don't think that's healthy.
To be continued, Ethan Behrman. Great to see you. Thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.
Well, NBC fired Matt Lauer for sexual harassment a year ago tomorrow, actually. The question is, what's happened at NBC since? Has it learned anything? Has there been a real investigation? Is it pervasive sexual harassment at NBC? We're going to speak to someone who worked at NBC, who has kept abreast of the story and has details for us on that after the break. Plus, creepy porn lawyer came on the show and furiously denied that he was exploiting Stormy Daniels. Now, Stormy Daniels is suggesting, yes, he is exploiting her. An amazing new twist in the seediest news story of the year after the break. Well, tomorrow marks the one-year anniversary of NBC News firing Matt Lauer. That, of course, followed allegations of sexual harassment by the Today Show host.
For the moment, all we can say is that we are heartbroken. I'm heartbroken for Matt. He is my dear, dear friend and my partner, and he is beloved by many, many people here. And I'm heartbroken for the brave colleague who came forward to tell her story, and any other women who have their own stories to tell.
It was a huge story, as you remember. NBC said it would fix itself after the scandal, get to the bottom of what happened and prevent it from happening again. Did they do that? Linda Vestra has been following this very carefully ever since. She's a philanthropist, a filmmaker, and a former network news anchor, including here. Her group has a full-page ad running in the New York Times tomorrow morning, also a piece on the foxnews.com opinion section, published just minutes ago, which is definitely worth reading. Linda Vestra joins us tonight. Linda, thanks very much for coming on.
Thank you very much.
So one of the reasons I'm grateful that you're bringing this to public attention is that there was supposed to be an investigation, a public investigation, from which we could all learn what happened. And I sort of wonder, where is it?
Well, they published results of this so-called investigation, but the truth wasn't in there because at least six women who were victimized by Matt Lauer, this according to them telling me personally or people close to them confirming to me, were never interviewed. And they had damaging details about Lauer and about others in management who allegedly protected them. Nothing happened. They weren't spoken to properly. That also means, there are 4 members who are on-air talent who worked closely with Matt who were never interviewed. They, too, had important information, and I believe the network knew it, that not only implicated Matt, but implicated other men in positions of power at NBC News, and that never got investigated. There has to be a question about why that didn't get out. Why did Andy Lack, the chairman of NBC News, not let this get out? Is it because he himself has a history of reported sexual misconduct in the workplace in the past, and so he himself is guilty? Or is it because he just wanted to protect other high-profile men at the company? He cares more about the bottom line, doesn't really care about the women whose lives and careers and reputations are being destroyed. He just cares about the money and the men he wants to protect.
But this is part of, NBC is part of a large publicly traded company, Comcast.
That's right.
And you would think they would have an interest in getting to the bottom of this. Why haven't they?
It is long overdue that the Comcast board of directors get involved. You're right. They are directors of a publicly traded company. They are answerable to shareholders. They are answerable to the public. This is a broadcaster that is regulated by the FCC. So these board of directors, they cannot get away with burying their heads in the sand. These are real women whose lives and careers and reputations are being destroyed. They can't ignore them. Comcast just put out a Twitter handle yesterday that said Comcast cares. Well, does it really? The directors need to make it their business to get involved, to investigate all of the alleged predators at NBC News, not just Matt Lauer, not just Tom Brokaw, who assaulted and harassed me, but the many, many others. And they need to get to the bottom of it. They need to publish the findings, and they need to clean out what's wrong at NBC News and really be a beacon as a journalistic organization should be.
You mentioned Andy Lack, who runs it, and suggested that he himself ought to be investigated. Has he been?
Yes.
And
No.
do you think there's evidence that he ought to be the subject of an investigation?
I know of two particular victims of his. Both have been interviewed by reporters, and I know of a member of CBS News management who was involved in both of those cases who confirmed that to me. So yes, that exists, and it's also been in print. I mean, this is out in the news, and what is shocking to me is that it's easily findable. You could Google this. And does NBC Universal and Comcast just not care? Does Steve Burke, Andy Lack's boss, did he know about this and just not care that he had an alleged, I would say, predator running the news division? Does Brian Roberts not care? Comcast was founded as a family company. Tell me how that is a family company when women are being abused and being silenced. And these non-disclosure agreements and forced arbitration are literally choking their very voices off and preventing them from speaking. How fair, moral, and ethical is that? This is a news organization. They should do much better.
Well, the fact that Andy Lack has been accused of that, who's running it, is shocking. Can you, very quickly, can you give us a sense of the time frame on those allegations against Andy Lack?
They were in the 80s, I am told, by the people who were knowledgeable about this, when he was executive producer at West 57th at CBS.
Amazing story. NBC ought to be leading the charge to get to the truth, but they're not.
They should.
You are. Linda Vester, thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Germany's Angela Merkel took a chance 3 years ago by letting in almost 1 million asylum seekers at one time. How has that worked out for her and for her country? We'll ask the ambassador of Germany that very question after the break. And then the creepy porn lawyer's client, Stormy Daniels, just made several pretty shocking allegations about him, her lawyer. We'll have all of that just ahead. America isn't the only country facing economic pressure and social volatility from unrestrained immigration. Just 3 years ago, Europe faced its own wave of migrants from Africa and the Middle East. The German Chancellor Angela Merkel responded to this by accepting nearly 1 million migrants in a single year. Adjusted for population, that would be like this country taking in 4 million in just 12 months. 3 years after that, how has that decision affected Germany and Merkel's political career? Rick Cannell is the current U.S. ambassador to Germany, and he joins us tonight. Ambassador, thanks very much for coming on.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Tucker.
So you're starting to see even figures on the left, John Kerry and Hillary Clinton most prominently, but others, rethinking the political fallout from Merkel's decision to do that in Germany. From where you sit, what was the effect of letting in those migrants?
Well, first of all, let's talk about the political effect. There was no plan in place, so the policy really fell apart. Chancellor Merkel and many in Germany had big hearts. They wanted to do something, but there wasn't a plan. And so even Chancellor Merkel now, all these years later, has agreed that there was no plan, and therefore the entire policy kind of fell apart because it wasn't implemented with hardcore security measures and follow-up. So from the political standpoint, next week, Chancellor Merkel is giving up her chairmanship of the party. There are 3 other people running, and the top issue, one of the top issues, is migration and her handling of migration. So politically, I would say that it really toppled her and has forced her now to give up the chairmanship of a party that she once ran with a very strong arm.
What's so interesting watching Germany from here is how the German press and its cultural leaders responded. So this was 3 years ago, and it was immediately obvious that a lot of ordinary Germans didn't like it, and that it was causing the crime rate to go up, and that it was causing economic pressure on ordinary Germans. But people weren't allowed to say that for a number of years in public, or am I misreading it?
No, you're exactly right, and I would even go so far as to say that we still have that problem here in Germany. There's still an overreaction if you complain about wanting secure borders or just an orderly process. Look, this is not about whether or not you have a heart. This is about whether or not you have a plan. And we in the United States know that 1 million people a year get U.S. citizenship. We are very generous. This is not about not wanting to have immigrants. And the whole idea that the left or some on the right even or the media are somehow mixing up legal immigration with illegal immigration is really an outrage. And those of us in public policy positions have to be able to push back and say, look, we're not talking about legal immigration. The United States is very generous. Germany has been very generous. This is about whether or not you have a plan, because not everyone is going to be able to come. And that's what you have to be able to say is we must prioritize. What is that number? Is it 1 million people in the United States? Is it 4 million people in Germany over a number of years? What is that number? Because whatever that number is, it's still going to be too low. You're still going to turn people away. So let's have an orderly process and figure out how to do legal immigration and do it the right way.
Are people, because I think that's what we need in the United States, is an honest adult conversation about what we can afford, what's good for our country, and what the next 100 years looks like demographically. We can't have that conversation here. Can Germans have it?
Look, I think the United States is having a better conversation than the Germans, to be honest. This has largely been controlled by elites in Berlin, but normal everyday people are beginning to say, wait a minute, this policy is not working. This is not about being generous. We are very generous. They have a lot of open borders throughout Europe. But I would also argue that the mistakes of Germany, Tucker, have rippled throughout all of Europe, because we've seen in Austria, for instance, with Sebastian Kurz, who came in with a platform to say, we must have security and a set of rules. This is not about not being generous. This is not about not being open to immigrants, but this is about just having rules. And once he established the fact that he wanted rules, Sebastian Kurz won in a very big way and is now becoming very popular throughout Germany. So while some in the media in Germany will try to push this into saying, well, you're a radical far-right person, the reality is that normal everyday Germans and Europeans are clamoring for leaders who want to have safe and secure borders and an orderly process.
Well, if they want to create radicals, they should keep lying to the population, because that's what they're going to get. Ambassador Grinnell, thank you very much. Great to see you tonight.
Thanks, Tucker.
Well, Stormy Daniels has made a remarkable and yet predictable allegation against the creepy porn lawyer. We'll have the details for you right after this break. America isn't the only country facing economic pressure and social volatility from unrestrained immigration. Just 3 years ago, Europe faced its own wave of migrants from Africa and the Middle East. The German Chancellor Angela Merkel responded to this by accepting nearly 1 million migrants in a single year. Adjusted for population, that would be like this country taking in 4 million in just 12 months. 3 years after that, how has that decision affected Germany and Merkel's political career? Rick Grinnell is the current U.S. ambassador to Germany, and he joins us tonight. Ambassador, thanks very much for coming on.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Tucker.
So you're starting to see even figures on the left, John Kerry and Hillary Clinton most prominently, but others, rethinking the political fallout from Merkel's decision to do that in Germany. From where you sit, what was the effect of letting in those migrants?
Well, first of all, let's talk about the political effect. There was no plan in place, so the policy really fell apart. Chancellor Merkel and many in Germany had big hearts. They wanted to do something, but there wasn't a plan. And so even Chancellor Merkel now, all these years later, has agreed that there was no plan, and therefore the entire policy kind of fell apart because it wasn't implemented with hardcore security measures and follow-up. So from the political standpoint, next week, Chancellor Merkel is giving up her chairmanship of the party. There are 3 other people running, and the top issue, one of the top issues, is migration and her handling of migration. So politically, I would say that it really toppled her, and